Republicans unanimously elected little-known Louisiana Congressman Mike Johnson as the 56th Speaker of the House. And since then, we've learned a lot about his extreme views. Backed by Donald Trump, who affectionately calls him MAGA Mike, Johnson privately encouraged House Republicans to join him in objecting to certifying Joe Biden's victory on January 6th. In fact, the New York Times called Johnson, quote, the most important architect of the Electoral College objections in 2020. He's anti-reproductive rights, supporting a nationwide abortion ban. He's anti-LGBTQ plus rights, supporting laws that would criminalize homosexual activity, and voting against legislation to codify same-sex marriage that Congress passed with bipartisan support in 2022. Last year, he introduced a bill that some describe as a national version of Florida's Don't Say Gay bill. Speaker Johnson also wants to make trillions of dollars in cuts to Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. And if none of that scares you, he's expected to be the least experienced Speaker of the House in 140 years, who now faces a November 17th deadline to pass legislation to keep the government funded. Joining me now is Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. He's a member of the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committees. Senator, thank you, as always, for coming to the Sunday show. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, just generally your view of Speaker Mike Johnson, what he represents.
Well, Jonathan, he is the most powerful Republican in America. He is the face of today's GOP. He's second in line to the president. And you outlined the positions he had, from election denial to climate science denial to anti-LGBTQ, anti-women's reproductive rights. This is who the Republican Party is now. And remember, he received the vote of every member of the Republican caucus to be Speaker. So that is obviously a very different vision than Virginians have, a very different vision than Senate Democrats or Republicans have. And so it sets up some challenging times ahead. But all that said, it's better to have a Speaker than to not have a Speaker, because we have important work to do for the American public.
And speaking of Virginia, again, before we get into the nitty-gritty of budget stuff, there are elections happening in Virginia right now, and Governor Youngkin has made it his goal to flip the legislature to Republican control. Do you think the ascension of Speaker Johnson is a help to Democrats on the ballot in Virginia?
Jonathan, you're right. We have every member of our state legislature up on elections November 7, although voting started on September 22nd. After Mass this morning, I'm going to be out campaigning with candidates this afternoon. I do think the chaos in the House GOP, including the essentially 3-week shutdown after they threw McCarthy out and couldn't decide who to put in, and then the elevation of Mike Johnson, whose views are really counter to what Virginians think. And we're a battleground state. We're not a blue state. I do think that's going to probably have an influence in the political atmosphere here that will be helpful to Democratic candidates in these elections.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Yesterday, I had Congressman Gregory Meeks, a ranking member on Foreign Affairs, and he had this to say about getting aid for Israel and Ukraine passed through the House. Watch this.
I thought and hoped that the Senate, since we have been dysfunctional on the House side because of the Republicans, that the Senate sends a bill over to the House that includes both aid to Ukraine and Israel, which is essential. I think that we work and get it done in as timely a fashion as possible.
And so, Senator, he is talking about aid to Israel and Ukraine being combined. But that tactic that he's talking about in terms of getting that aid passed is also, to my mind, the same tactic that needs to happen in terms of keeping the government open in time for the November 17th deadline. So are you and your colleagues in the Senate moving to not only get Israel-Ukraine aid over to the House before they have a chance to do anything, but are you also looking to get budget bills and other things over to the House before they are able to get their act together?
Yeah, Jonathan, absolutely. So we will pass in the coming days the first big budget bill, and it will pass by a big bipartisan margin, getting it over to the House. My sense is the November 17 deadline, which was a tight deadline even if the House stayed open, the fact that the House was closed for essentially 3 weeks means that deadline is likely to get adjusted backwards to the end of the year, which would be the norm. We normally reach the budget deals in December, right before the holidays, not in November. So I think you'll see it adjust. But we are going to send the first bipartisan budget bill over this week. And then we've got to send over a bipartisan package that includes Ukraine aid and Israel aid. And let's be clear, Gaza humanitarian aid. I listened to Ambassador Ross. Israelis urged Gazans, who are not the same as Hamas, to move into South Gaza to be protected. But once they're there, you can't choke them off. Having 10 trucks come in to a population of millions, the population of Gaza is like the population of the state of New Mexico. You couldn't supply all New Mexicans on 10 trucks a day. Hundreds of trucks a day were going into Gaza to give people food, medicine before October 7. And the Israelis have to make sure that there's a safe way to deliver food, medicine, household supplies, water to the Gazans who listen to them and move south. And so we're going to send a package that will include Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, state disaster relief, border efforts. It's going to be a sizable package. And I think you will see us get a big bipartisan vote in the Senate.
And real quickly, Senator, since you are a member of Armed Services and the Foreign Relations Committees, I'm just wondering, have you heard Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu articulate any kind of plan or vision for what comes next after their operation in Gaza is complete?
You know, it seems like the plan, and I have not heard directly from the prime minister, but certainly from our own folks who are in dialogue, is to try to be as targeted as possible to reduce or eliminate the threat of Hamas, a terrorist group that's pledged to destroy Israel. To do it in a way, though, that ramps up efforts to protect civilians. We need to get convoys of aid into these civilians in South Gaza. I'm not happy with the pace of it thus far. Israel, according to the UN Relief Agency, has shut off water service into southern Gaza. Again, if you tell people to go there to be safe, you can't then choke them off or target them. And so we need to do everything we can to make sure that there's adequate supplies, food, water, et cetera, to the poor Gazans who are caught in this horrible crossfire initiated by the Hamas terrorist attack.
Senator Tim Kaine from the great Commonwealth of Virginia, thank you very much for coming back to the Sunday Show.
You bet, Jonathan.